everyone, welcome to Hub and Spoke, a storytelling platform produced by the J. Hurt Hub for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Davidson College. I'm your host, Liz Smith Brigham, Davidson class of 2004, and director at the Hurt Hub at Davidson. Every other week, we'll feature Davidson alumni and other members of our community who've started their own businesses, who are investing in innovation, and who are at the leading edge of solving the world's most pressing challenges. Through these conversations, we hope to inspire and connect the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs leading lives of leadership and service. All right, well, let's jump in and welcome Megan, Davidson class of 2014.
Hi.
Hello, product marketing manager at LinkedIn. Welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we begin, I'm going to read a little bit about you and your background, and then we'll really dig into your journey from Davidson to where you are today. So
Great.
Megan is a product marketing manager at LinkedIn, my former career in product marketing as well. I'm very excited, where she focuses on go-to-market strategy for the company's talent solutions products. Prior to LinkedIn, Megan worked in integrated marketing and creative advertising for a range of different brands, from Procter & Gamble to Apple to Mercari, first in New York and then in her hometown of San Francisco. She graduated from Davidson, as we mentioned, in 2014 with a major in English and minor in French. Great. Thanks so much, Megan, for joining us. I love to start off these conversations just a little bit more color on your background and introduction. So can you walk us through your career journey from Davidson to today?
Sure. So when I was at Davidson, I always knew that I wanted to do something in the marketing and communications realm. And I think throughout my time at Davidson, really focused on internships and having conversations with alumni and learning exactly what that meant and how many different spaces there were within marketing, advertising, communications. And I actually decided I wanted to work in creative advertising and moved to New York, as you mentioned. And that was really fun. I was doing full scale productions for Procter & Gamble. So shooting Selena Gomez and producing ads that would appear in Vogue and during the Super Bowl and all kinds of really cool stuff. And I also, when I was working in advertising in New York, also worked on Kohl's. And it was really fun and fast paced and sort of your typical post-grad New York experience. But the problem I had was that I was marketing products that I didn't really believe in. I was pushing, Kohl's being a family business, it being geared towards moms. And I don't think that the store experience necessarily delivered against that. Shampoo and conditioner from Pantene in a similar vein, I didn't believe that the product was really what was the best on the market. And so when I moved to San Francisco, tried to get into product marketing so that I could really own that end-to-end experience. So building products that were geared towards their end consumers, whether or not that was a consumer or a customer or business, and then eventually positioning them and marketing them. So I worked at a couple different roles in San Francisco. I mentioned Mercari. That was a small startup consumer marketplace, kind of like an eBay, but a little bit more user-friendly. And then I actually did work at WeWork, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little later on. And then most recently at LinkedIn, super excited to be at LinkedIn. I started actually the week we started working from home. So it's been a bit of a journey in the pandemic and onboarding. But at LinkedIn, I focus on our talent solutions business. So that's actually the business to business side of LinkedIn. So obviously we have LinkedIn that many of you use as a consumer. We also sell to talent professionals, recruiting products, learning and development products, and employee engagement products. And I own that side of business, working on go-to-market strategy, as you mentioned.
Great, thank you. And we're going to dig in more into all of those different pieces. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your English major. Also, I am an English major, so a little bit biased here. But that the choice of an English major and how that might have prepared you for the career that you're ultimately on.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved being an English major. I wholeheartedly believe when I was at Davidson, just pick something that you loved. And I love to read and create arguments. Obviously, as every English major, I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer. But ultimately decided that this was the route for me. It is invaluable to have been an English major. I'm sure this is true of many majors at Davidson, of just being able to synthesize so much information into a coherent argument. That's important not only in building a product or marketing that product, but also in internally selling what you're making. So I have to create presentations all the time to communicate why I'm proposing what I'm proposing, get buy-in from all kinds of people, and that sort of like argument-based critical thinking has been huge throughout my career. So I definitely think that, yes, maybe I could have gotten some of that with a business degree, but I really do think that having done that with English really set me up for success in a way that I don't think my colleagues who weren't in liberal arts had the same kind of experience. So.
And one thing I know you mentioned when we were kind of talking and prepping earlier this week was your independent study with Dr. Campbell and the town of Davidson. Could you speak a little bit to that? Because, well, you know, here at the Hurt Hub, we're very focused on experiential learning. And I know the Hurt Hub didn't exist when you were a student, but I think a lot of what you described there, if you could just tell that story for the audience, that would be helpful.
Sure. So when I was at Davidson, I wanted to have some resume builders. I actually did some internships, as I mentioned, including I was the director of public relations for student government, and I worked for Quillen's communication office as well. But what I was able to do with Dr. Campbell was create this independent study where I did an internship with the town of Davidson for their Shop Small campaign, which I believe they still use some assets that I helped build back in the day. And so that was for Small Business Saturday, creating a campaign to encourage people to shop in the town versus at, along the highway or in Charlotte. And so what we did is I would go out and get real world experience. I'd go to town meetings. I worked with the communications office there. And then Dr. Campbell would give us articles about, actual like communications, like in the more theoretical sense. And then we would talk about how my experience was, in parity with that or different from kind of the more theoretical aspects of marketing and communications. So it was really fun, really hands-on, different than most of the classes that I had taken at Davidson, but like a good bridge between sort of practical and theoretical. And so it's so cool to see students doing that in a little bit more of a legitimate way than me kind of creating this course. But I was so grateful for Dr. Campbell to let me do so.
That's great. And I'm curious too, if we could dig in a little bit more to some of the career choices, that you made. Obviously you alluded to this of you weren't really sure that what you were doing in the advertising world sort of jived with your values or, products that you might believe in, et cetera. How did you make that decision to go to a startup at Mercari, and how did you even get into that? Because I think sometimes everybody thinks it's elusive and that you have to be a unicorn to get into the startup arena. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So similarly, if you work in advertising, we call it being client side. And that also feels very much like a unicorn. A lot of my clients had business degrees. They were much older. I didn't see a lot of people in their 20s in these client-facing roles. So for me, I wasn't necessarily looking to work in a startup. I really just wanted to work for a brand or a company. And similar to, I think, how a lot of people get their first kind of foot in the door in that realm is that I had a connection through actually a friend of a Davidson friend who was working at Mercari, and they were a Japanese like public company. Actually, they IPO'd right when I started, but they were building out their US business. And so I came in because I had the experience in creative advertising to try and bolster their brand awareness in the US. And then I also was helping adapt their product and build features that would appeal more to a US audience. The product experience in Japan and the US is very different, as I'm sure you can imagine. So that was a really fun job. And I think it's not necessarily as hard as I thought it was. And whether or not it's, working for Clorox or a startup, I think it's really just about getting your foot in the door and knowing how to speak to your experience in the right way based on what that company is looking for, and really just leveraging your network on LinkedIn.
Which we'll get to in a moment. But I'm curious there too, could you give us a little bit more depth, not just necessarily about the geographic differences, obviously, in taking a new product to market in a new market, but your day-to-day at a startup and what that felt like versus working for a very large, advertising agency?
Yeah. It was a lot of meetings, to be honest, and a lot different than at the agency. It was very, buttoned up client presentations, a lot of more process oriented, and the startup is very dynamic environment. You're having brainstorms, a lot of putting up specs, like product spec on the walls, and actually writing on them, and being on our phones on the product and experiencing it for ourselves. We use this application called Figma, which is really cool real-time collaboration tool. So you can actually go into product designs and play around. And so we're constantly at each other's desks, kind of playing around with different options for the product design. And then obviously a lot of meetings, just socializing it with different people in the organization. As I mentioned, it was a Japanese brand. So we actually had some developers who sat in Japan. And so we would be staying late to review their product as well. And then I also had a couple projects that I was working on as kind of the first real product marketing person, of trying to get our competitive analysis built out to figure out where we could play and identify different opportunities where Mercari could win. For example, we had plus size is a really great opportunity for these marketplace apps, people who have very specific fits that they like. And then imagine, you love this shirt from Gap and they discontinue it, and the only way you can get it is secondhand. So it was a huge opportunity. I put together a proposal of how to take advantage of that as well. So kind of a myriad of different things, but super fun, super dynamic. But yeah, I wanted to move on. One, because I was commuting to Palo Alto from San Francisco, which for those that don't know, the Bay Area is about an hour and a half in my car. So it's pretty brutal. But also just kind of wanted a little bit more rigor. So I think it really kind of depends on where you sit and what you're interested in. Startups are super fun, great way to get experience. But I wanted a little bit more of a learning opportunity and more mentorship at that stage in my career.
That's great. And I spent a lot of time in Palo Alto, so I understand the BART train / commute situation, going from
Brutal.
Cisco City up into Palo Alto. So I appreciate that. I'm curious, could you speak a little bit to, and you alluded to this, but just culture, right? And the sort of, maybe not just in these two instances at Mercari versus, advertising agencies. I definitely want to talk a little bit on WeWork to the extent to which you're interested in talking about that. But how do you assess a culture, before you've taken any of these roles? And then once you're sort of in it every day, determine, is this a fit? Is it not? Do I stay? Do I look at something else, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a really tough one because it's so hard to know what the culture is going to be like until you're in it. The best opportunity that you have is really to listen to your gut when you're meeting with the people on the team. If something just doesn't feel right, if the conversation isn't easy flowing, those are things you should definitely listen to, because I have, as you alluded to, have definitely been at companies that don't have the right culture, and it makes it really hard to do your work and to grow professionally. As you mentioned, I work at WeWork, which is now the poster child for bad culture. the interesting thing there is that my immediate team was actually great. So again, kind of what I was saying, I was really wanting to make sure that the people I was interviewing with, I jived well. Coming from Mercari, there were actually some problems with my smaller team. So I was really wanting a great manager and a great experience. And it was so funny to see at WeWork how that tops down culture could really impact just my day to day at this huge company at the time. Despite having great teammates, a great manager, and everything, I actually started the week before they filed to go public. So I joined the company. I was really excited about it. My father owned a small property management company my whole life. And so I used to work leasing, showing commercial office spaces that were, not the best quality. And he worked in kind of a dingy old school cubicle office. And so I really believed in the product. I thought it was this really cool marriage of what I was interested in and sort of like my upbringing. And ultimately, in the fallout of them going public, it was just back and forth, changing direction every week. Especially on marketing, it's like, if all this is going on, you don't want to come out with a big advertising campaign, right? That just adds fuel to the fire. It's something that the press can kind of pick apart. And so I was having to build out these campaigns, and then they'd pull the trigger, and then I'd build out another campaign and they'd pull the trigger, and there was sort of budget, but not really. And then it turned out there wasn't budget. And so you can imagine how difficult that is to be pouring so much of yourself into these totally unrealistic timelines and then never having it see the light of day. It was really hard to make the decision to leave because I wasn't there for that long. I was there for about 6 months, the worst 6 months of WeWork's life. I was there. And a lot of my colleagues were sticking it out. They really believed in the future of work. And as I mentioned, it was so important for me to just find a culture where I thought that I could grow professionally and build the skills that I wanted to build. And I just didn't feel like I was getting that from WeWork. So that's kind of what ultimately drove me to look for new opportunities. And obviously, I'm so grateful I did, because the timing was really incredible. Like, I started, as I mentioned, the week that the pandemic hit in San Francisco. So, and WeWork had another huge batch of layoffs during that time as well. So it worked out really great. When I took the job at LinkedIn, culture was the most important thing. They have such a great reputation for their culture. I've talked to a lot of people who worked there for a while. I could speak to that. And then I loved the team that I interviewed with too. So it sort of checked all the boxes. I really believe in the product, in the mission to connect people to opportunity. So really excited to be there every day. Great.
No, that's great. And kind of continuing our theme of culture, I have a few questions. So one, what are some of your favorite questions in the interview cycle to determine if that was a cultural fit? You just mentioned that you met with all these great people who had been there for a long time, and you were able to ascertain that there would be a fit, or anticipate that there would be a fit. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So sometimes people ask like really random questions. I actually don't think that that's the best way to assess culture fit. For me, it's really just talking about the work that I have done previously and the work that the other people are doing at the company. Hearing somebody explain the challenges that they're trying to solve for, how they're going about it, how they're working with other people, like, you can tell if they're interested and passionate about their jobs, like, right away. And I think for me, that's what's most important, is making sure, yes, culturally, being able to spend time in non-pandemic times with your colleagues in person, like getting drinks after work or whatever that might be, is super important. But more so is how that actually manifests itself in the work, and collaborating with one another and just being genuinely happy to be there is super important. So I like to focus actually on kind of the problems that they're trying to solve, and talk through what they're actually working on. And then vice versa for me. I think that that's when I really click with people in interviews, is when we're talking about projects that I've done, and they can kind of ask questions and we can talk about it from a work perspective.
And similarly to that, because I think you joined LinkedIn after the Microsoft acquisition,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. So could you speak a little bit to, okay, you have this gigantic brand that lives inside a gigantic brand with so many resources, and obviously Microsoft has this extensive product portfolio and different businesses. Just elaborate on that a little bit more of what it means to be inside that type of a culture.
Sure. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Microsoft acquired LinkedIn several years ago now. We've actually stayed LinkedIn pretty much through and through. So we didn't go through a rebrand, nothing like that. We still operate very independently. We have our own executives. I believe the only person who directly reports into a Microsoft person is our CEO. So we are very much independent. But what it means is that we have that additional financial stability. So, for example, when the pandemic hit, everyone was so grateful that our business, which so much hinges on people hiring, had that backing from Microsoft. It's something we also like to talk about with our customers. So when we're selling them solutions, them knowing that we have that stability from Microsoft is a huge advantage when they're comparing us to other companies, particularly our LinkedIn Learning product. Some of our competitors are a little bit leaner startups, and having that kind of backing of a brand that they're using is a really big advantage. We also have started to dabble our toes in integrations between our products. So Teams has the ability to now bring in LinkedIn Learning courses and things like that. So hopefully in the future we'll have more integrations. But really, it just means that stability of being part of a larger company. And they've worked really, really hard to keep the culture what it is at LinkedIn. So I have no idea what the culture is like at Microsoft. At LinkedIn, we really try and have it feel like an entrepreneurial environment, despite it being kind of a pretty large company now. And a lot of kind of team pods. So I work on product marketing, and everyone on that team is really close. And other functions have their own little micro cultures as well.
That's great. Now, we could spend hours and days talking about product marketing. It's one of my absolute favorite subjects, having had a career in that area. But I'm curious, can you define product marketing for all of our listeners and watchers? Because I think it's one that has many different definitions and interpretations, and especially if you see any differences between the sort of B2B, business to business versus a business to consumer type of role, since you've been in both worlds.
Yeah. So I think the highest level definition I could give for product marketing is being the voice of the customer. So we represent the customer in all conversations, whether or not it's building the product itself and partnering with product teams to build a product that we believe consumers will use, or creating a business case based on what we know about the market, what people are willing to pay for the product, whether or not it solves a need. It's kind of our job to define that opportunity and then bringing it to market. So figuring out how to position the product based on what we know about the consumer, what messages will resonate with them, how do we sell it to certain segments or verticals, and then bringing that to market by partnering with marketing teams and with sales. So sales activation is a huge element of my job. That's training salespeople on how to actually talk about the product, position it to their customers, and then giving them assets so they can have those conversations. So those are presentations, one-pagers, actual collateral that they can share with their customers that clearly defines what the product is. When I was working at Mercari, it's a consumer to consumer marketplace product. And so that experience was a little bit more when you go bring something to market, it's push notifications or emails, more of traditional marketing in that sense. And a lot of iterations of testing and learning, because you get data so quickly, right, about how customers are responding to something. And so it's very iterative and quick. On the B2B side, it's a little bit slower, and it's hard to see that quickly how you need to optimize your product. And as I mentioned, it's a lot more focused on sales activation, partnering with sales, not only to bring it to market, but to understand how is this resonating, like what are customers saying, and they're a huge partnership for us in making sure that our product is resonating with customers. Similar to Hub and Spoke, we believe in that model. So product marketing is really at the center of everything. We own the project management of the product going to market. And so we partner with product teams as well as with marketing, as well as with sales. So we're really at the center of it all.
And how do you think about your Davidson education and experience of managing or leading, all of those different groups, whether it's, project management, but also training others? Are there certain things that stand out to you that you feel like really help set you up for success in that role?
Yeah, absolutely. Collaboration is huge. You want everyone to want to meet with you. You have to really earn your place in these rooms, depending on the company that you work at. When I was at Mercari, it was a totally new function, and we had to really earn our place. And so you wanted people to value you and want to add you to meetings. You couldn't just know when they were happening. You had to be invited in a lot of cases. Sometimes they were in Japan, for example. So I think like being a strong collaborator is one of my superpowers at work. And I think that really started with having small class sizes and having the confidence to speak up and share my opinions and like listen to other people and understand their arguments and figure out like how to come to a compromise. So that's really huge, that piece. The other part is Davidson obviously is not an easy place to go to college. It's really challenging. And, I might have taken this to an extreme, and I am very project management oriented, and I would start my papers right when I got the prompts. I don't think that that is the normal thing to do, but I knew that if I could just get some crappy first draft on paper, that I could then iterate on it over time and then ultimately turn it in weeks later when it was due. And so that kind of like project management that I started in college of like, if I know I hit these milestones, if I read this many pages this day, like I will be able to deliver my paper on that day. That behavior has definitely continued throughout my career. And it's definitely something that I'm known for in all of my roles at all my companies. So.
Yeah, no, that for sure resonates with me as well. Not just the project management aspects of it, but that internal education. I think because product marketing is on the surface a new skill set, but honestly, if you go back and you look at big companies like Procter and Gamble, brand management is effectively product marketing in other ways.
Exactly.
So, it's been around for a while, but the vernacular still needs to be sort of educated in some of these new companies. And I'm curious too, relative to that, where you're, standing in your career, you've had all these successes thus far. Are you thinking about business school or have you made that decision? Because I know there are a lot of students who are interested in even, younger alums who are like, do I go get my MBA? Do I not? Is this going to help me? I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a very full cycle conversation because I remember actually talking to you when I was a senior about you going to business school and how valuable that was. And it was something I was actively thinking about as early as when I was a senior as well. I'm probably not going to go to business school at this point. It's something that I have weighed a lot. I do still think there's opportunity down the road potentially for a part-time program that could be really valuable if I want to kind of take my career to the next level, depending where I am in 5 to 10 years. Why I ultimately decided not to go was one, the opportunity cost for me personally. A lot of my colleagues in the same position that I'm in now are coming out of business school. And I think it's really valuable for people who want to work in product marketing, who are coming from different backgrounds, like maybe they worked in management consulting, that happens a lot. Some people who worked in sales and went to business school. And I think for product marketing in particular, there is quite a pipeline of MBAs going into product marketing. It's pretty competitive, especially at LinkedIn. Like I applied for a product marketing role at LinkedIn during 3 cycles. So like my first, when I worked at Mercari, I also applied for jobs at LinkedIn. When I worked at WeWork, also applied the third time I was successful. So it's really competitive, and having an MBA is a really great way. You can do internships with like LinkedIn and then get a full-time job afterwards. So absolutely, like you can build the skill sets that you need by getting an MBA. I personally feel like I've gained, at least in my current role, the experiences that I need just by hands-on experience. Especially like I came from marketing, so the go-to-market piece, I think having the real experience of bringing these products to market has really prepared me for that. I think in 5 to 10 years, as I alluded to, having the broader business context, I think, is very important. And depending on how these 5 to 10 years go, if I can get that knowledge on the job, great. If not, I think having confidence in your own business acumen and really understanding, hey, like this product is super important. I've analyzed the business opportunity, and like I think it's really hugely powerful to have that knowledge base just for your confidence and being able to be in the room, especially at the exec level. So we'll see. I don't think you need to do it. If you are making a pivot, it's a really great opportunity. And also like the network is huge. I see that and I'm very jealous. So I think it really depends on an individual and their own career journey.
Yeah, I think that's right. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased having gone to Michigan for my MBA, but I went very early, right? It was right at that sort of 3-year mark. And to your point about a
Yeah.
pivot, I was working for an industrial supply distribution company that was great, but that wasn't my goal longer term to stay kind of in that industry.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
ability to have more exposure to what's out there and different types of businesses early on was the
Yeah.
choice that I made in that situation.
Yeah.
But I totally agree.
And I will say, like, if you are at all thinking about getting an MBA, like, just take the test, because that is the hardest part. Like, if you graduate from college and you don't have a job yet, like, take the GMAT, take the GRE. Like, it lasts for 5 years and it opens up so many options. Like, I studied for that test like twice now in my professional career and just like didn't carve out the time, probably because I, in my heart, didn't really think that I wanted to go. But it's definitely something that you should explore no matter what you're doing if you're interested in it, but definitely not a firm requirement.
Great. Well, I know we are just about half past the hour, so I want to remind everybody to put questions into the chat. I will keep going because we have a few that we haven't gotten to yet, but definitely put your thoughts and questions into the chat and we'll start taking those questions. I'm curious, if we could talk a little bit more about mentorship and role models, because you mentioned that was something that you were seeking out, when we were talking a little bit about culture. You talk about how you go about finding a mentor, the mentors that you've had, like what value that they've really brought to your career development.
Sure. So I've had mentors throughout my career in a more official capacity and an unofficial capacity. Starting out of college, this was as simple as somebody who started the year before me, who was just showing me the ropes of, how to manage the post-production process and that kind of thing. And again, it's all about really building relationships with them. They do have something to gain as well. Often, like in that case, people who are seeking promotions, like really want to be able to build relationships with people and help them grow from their own, selfish career perspectives, but also just because it's a rewarding experience and it's interesting to help people kind of grow along their journey. I'd say the biggest mentors that I've had have been more recent career. When I was at Mercari, I was really interested in product marketing, and there was a woman there who had just gotten her MBA who was building out the function, and I raised my hand and said, I really want to join this team. And she really taught me all about the new function, and she had just come off of business school. And so she was teaching, we were doing little like business school type classes together, which was super fun. So as I mentioned, it is possible to get it on the job. So in that realm, it wasn't just about the job that we were doing at Mercari. It was really about like me as a person and what I was interested in professionally. I think for her, it was also about just the rewarding feeling of being a mentor, but also like, who knows, maybe down the road, she wants to start her own company and she wants to build relationships with people at all stages in their career journey. For me, it was just hugely important in helping me navigate like, what is product marketing? How do I get these roles? How do I talk about it? She also was the one who really enlightened me into LinkedIn and how to game the algorithm. So I can credit her a little bit with helping me get this role at LinkedIn now. At LinkedIn as well, as I mentioned, they have an amazing culture. They actually have kind of a semi-official mentorship program where you're meant to kind of pick a mentor outside of your immediate group. So my manager, like in my first month at the company, was like, okay, don't forget, you get to choose a manager, like put down some criteria and I'll help identify a person at the company. So that I think is a little bit more rare. Usually you kind of have to seek it out on your own, but just being really proactive about you know, in the role that you're in at, especially at a large company, like other people might be doing things that you're interested in or have a career journey that is similar to yours, but branched out in a different way. And just being able to feel comfortable having the conversations and learning about their experience can really flourish into a really impactful professional relationship.
And now that you mentioned it, gaming the algorithm, LinkedIn. If you have, you know, best practices, I know in a moment you'll be speaking with another class here later on this afternoon. But I'm curious, do you have some tips and tricks, you know, for those gathered here today on how to make the most of your LinkedIn experience?
Yeah, I think confidence is a big one. You should be building out your profile and more than just having your jobs listed and a picture of yourself. You should be actually writing descriptions for each of your jobs, like explaining what you did in the role. You should have a summary that really explains who you are as a person and a professional. That's important because if you're applying for jobs, whether or not it's on LinkedIn, anywhere else, like people will often check your LinkedIn profile before they read through your resume. Like reading through your resume is quite a commitment. Like that's a very long document. You're kind of in it if you're looking. LinkedIn is just a really quick way to be like, oh, okay, this person checks boxes. So think about it as like part of your own marketing yourself, what stage in the journey that is and how you want to appear in that moment when somebody is looking at you. Gaming the algorithm kind of goes hand in hand with that, is that LinkedIn actually integrates with applicant tracking systems, which are called ATSs. So Greenhouse, you might know if you've applied to jobs. And if you have like 100 applicants for a role, Greenhouse is trying to elevate the people to the top who are the best fit for that job. And they do that by, you know, scanning a resume. And if they're integrated with LinkedIn, the things on your profile is going to help where you rise in that flow. So if I'm using the right words in my profile that are relevant to the job that I'm applying for, I'm going to appear higher in the search results. So it's kind of both. It's like qualitatively, you want to make sure that your profile really speaks to who you are, sends a clear message. If you're applying for a job in product marketing, it shouldn't be all about finance. Like that's not genuinely what you do. Like you should be able to figure out how to market yourself for the career path that you want. And then in a more quantitative perspective, making sure that just like you would do search engine optimization, like treating your profile in that way. So having your summary have words that if you're applying for product marketing roles, go to the roles on LinkedIn and see what skills are on there, see what words they're using, and make sure that your profile has those things. The skills are also very important on the profile. So make sure that you add skills, get people to endorse you for those skills, because those will also help with your application.
That's great. Yes, as someone who has tweaked their LinkedIn profile so many different times, I'm curious too about that of like publishing articles and posting, and you know, does that help elevate your profile or your ranking as well?
Yeah, it definitely helps bolster your presence on LinkedIn. I think the most important thing for appearing like, high on a list is your profile itself being relevant. But so much about LinkedIn is building connections and relationships with people. And so having posting articles, reposting articles, like being engaged with other people on the platform is a really helpful tool to build those relationships and communicate who you are professionally. And, for example, taking you, Liz, like we connected however long ago, 2014, when I was a senior at Davidson, and we've stayed connected on LinkedIn, and I've seen you post things. I'm sure I've popped up here and there for you as well. And so, you can keep those connections in a more passive way than like, scheduling coffee every year or something like that. So it's really just a great opportunity to make sure you're staying plugged in with your network.
No, that's great. It's been a fabulous platform for me, I know personally. So we did have a question come in from Mike Kelly, who joins us today in the audience. He has just finished the Steve Jobs biography by Walter Isaacson, which if anybody, it's fabulous. I don't know if I remember distinctly reading it on the beach in Hawaii. So there's some really good memories of that book. But I'm curious if you have thoughts on how Steve Jobs, you think, has impacted technology and marketing, and in particular product marketing, because I do think he's sort of the grandfather of product marketing. I have thoughts, but I want you to go ahead and take that first.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I actually did work at Apple for a few months. They were a client when I was at the agency, and I was actually working on Apple's campus. Unfortunately, not in Apple Park, I wish. I was in like a really sad vendor building. But I think you've got it right. Like he really did kind of make product marketing into what it is today. And product marketing at Apple is like, I like to joke, they're like gods at Apple. It's like they own everything. They own the product experience. They own the research. Like in the truest sense, they are the ultimate in product marketing. And I think at Apple, why that's so important is that like everyone listens to them. They are hugely important to the strategy from a hardware and from a software perspective. Like Apple has really been on the forefront, and that's because they really listen to what works for the customer, right? Like that's why Apple was able to grow into what they are, is because their product was built for people. And in order to do that, they had really strong product marketers who were building those products and figuring out how to position them, how to construct the hardware, software, and that whole experience. So yeah, hugely influential. I think product marketing is more common. Like that God level is a little bit more common at a bigger tech company. And then at a smaller one, it's a little bit more of like all hands on deck kind of role. And depending on the stage where the company is, and maybe they started being more marketing focused, or they started being like purely like all developers. Like it really depends on that growth path of how prominent the product marketing function is. But definitely when you're looking at big tech companies, like everyone's trying to replicate that Apple experience.
Yeah, no, it's well said. So one of the reasons why I got into tech was because of Apple. So Apple came to Michigan's campus in 2008 and hosted a case competition and said, hey, we're going to start this thing called the App Store. And they went on this sort of roadshow with other business schools as well, but came to us and said, we want you all to create the first prototypes for the apps on the App Store. And so it was them employing what I love to say is empathy as currency, right? And getting into their core market of, maybe 18 to 30-ish year olds, initially, and giving us that opportunity. And I think what you said too, of listening to the customer, you go back and you think about the initial advertising campaigns for iPod was 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? And it's become sort of a cliche case study at this point, but think about, okay, they went running around with people to see how all of us were listening to our Discmans, and like how annoying it would be when you hit a bump or something on your bike and the CD would skip, right? Or I could only bring 12 songs on a CD, or I have, the old school, I'm dating myself, I guess, but the yellow, like waterproof Walkman where you put your cassette tape in there. But the value of music and how it permeates different life experiences. I think it's just really indicative of the care that they bring to that product development. So we could talk for a long time on that, on that front too. But yes, and Mike makes this point too in the chat. You know, did Jobs tell people what they needed rather than ask them what they needed? It's an interesting point. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. You don't necessarily always want to give the customer every single thing that they want, right? Like you have to make sure that your product, one, is like a brand that you're proud of, but also like if you're looking at the product experience itself, like the customer doesn't necessarily know what the best product experience is. Like they're just going to share their thoughts about things that they want to see, and your job is to really discern, okay, what can I extract from that and influence my product versus like how am I going to craft my product to deliver exactly what the customer wants. And so I think Steve Jobs and Apple do a really great job of finding that balance of saying, like, we know that customers or people want to have, taking the same example you were just using, they want some, like all the stuff in their pocket. But, you know, the concept of the wheel, like I'm sure that a customer wasn't like, I want a wheel where I can turn all my songs. They probably want like 30 buttons that they could push. And so finding that balance of creating an innovative product that the market doesn't yet know, as well as like solving a customer problem, is sort of the goal.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, what I've seen too, I would say more on the B2B software side, and maybe you see this at LinkedIn, when you're thinking about developing a product roadmap and you're soliciting all this customer feedback and asking, I've seen a lot of smaller software companies that start in this sort of custom development realm. And then they reach a certain point where they want to scale. And all of a sudden, you start building what we call technical debt, right? Because you've built up all of these widgets and functions and features that aren't necessarily applicable to a much broader market. They're great for those individual loud customers, you know, that are paying you. Well, good. I know we're kind of coming up on time, but I wanted, you know, this question I've asked of everybody who's been on as a storyteller as well as Hub and Spoke. And we talk a lot at the Hurt Hub about building a community of entrepreneurs and innovators and leaders. And one of the biggest pieces of that is reciprocity. So we thank you so much for your time today. But are there certain things that you would like to sort of press upon our community, like challenges or different ways of thinking about whether it's technology or company culture or other things that you wanted to share?
Yeah. I think one thing, just thinking about my own experience to hear that I wish I had had more of, is confidence in myself. I think like I felt coming out of it a little bit like an underdog, like coming out of college, like I have a liberal arts degree, I don't have a business degree, you know, I didn't have an internship at a big agency. I'm like, so I can't get one, or I can't work in tech because like they only hire extremely experienced people or whatever it might be. And just having a little bit more confidence in myself in order to like go after and chase those experiences, coupled with patience. Obviously, like it's really hard to get a job at Google coming out of college, but you know, eventually if you want to work at Google, like chasing after experiences that can bolster your confidence. So, you know, like something that you're good at and you can prove yourself and you enjoy it because you're good at it, like ultimately you'll get where you need to go. So I think that that's super important. On the culture front, I can't emphasize it enough. Like if you work at a company and the people are amazing and the product's great and you believe in it, like you can do anything at that company. You can come in as like a business analyst and shift to be, you know, a marketing manager. It's easier to make those internal switches if the culture is conducive to that, to internal mobility and people seeing people as people. So I think it's just really important to be honest with yourself when assessing those things. Sometimes your dream job won't actually be your dream job. We were, as an example. So just being like honest with yourself and confident in your own choices, I think is a huge one. And then lastly, I'll say, yeah, the networking piece is huge. I think WeWork was the only job that I didn't get through networking. Everything else has been through networking, primarily through Davidson, actually. Shout out to Jean, who helped me get my first job at Gray, who's now in my book club. So, you never know how those things will pan out. So definitely have the confidence to reach out to people. I've never had a Davidson person say that they didn't want to meet with me, which is huge. And they're always very insightful, interesting conversations. So yeah, just do all the things.
Thanks so much, Megan. Very much appreciate the confidence piece, as well as working the network and not being afraid to use LinkedIn and to reach out to others, especially in the Davidson community. Well, I want to thank you so much for this conversation today. As always, it was lovely. I'm so glad that we can sort of thread the needle of us connecting when you were a senior and coming back in this capacity now officially. Thank you again, Megan, and thank you to our audience. It's lovely to see you all, and anybody watching this on demand. Thank you for taking the time, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.